60% mental and 40% physical.
Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Hey, welcome to a special edition of the BIA podcast, Buckeye Grove Instant Analysis. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I will be joined by Griffin Strom here in a second. And in case you've been living in a cave or not paying attention, we're a step closer to a college football season. Maybe not, we don't know, but at least the Big Ten came out earlier today and released a schedule for all the teams, all 14 teams in the conference, so we know who's up next. We don't, scratch Bowling Green off. We knew that the non-conference teams were taken off. It's a 10-game, all Big Ten schedule, and, with that, let's bring in Griffin, and we will kind of talk about what happened today. Griffin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge day of news in the Big Ten, and it really feels just like an exciting day, honestly, because the nature of the news cycle with the virus and everything, kind of a lot of news that isn't so optimistic. A lot of people wondering if there's going to be a season. Today definitely feels like we got closer to that. We've actually got some games on the schedule that we can start really speculating about. Ever since they scrapped that original schedule.
Yeah, it had a March Madness feeling to it, and maybe not entirely. I mean, we knew the pool of 13 teams that Ohio State could have drawn on the schedule, and in essence, they got the 9 teams that were already on the previously released schedule, and it was just the addition of one more. But we didn't know who was going to be where and everything else along those lines. I mean, home and aways didn't really, they didn't move or anything, but it's still, I felt like I was sitting there, filling out a bracket, even though, at Buckeye Grove, we did have the schedule a little bit early, and we're teasing about it on the Horseshoe Lounge the day before. Good reason to be a member of Buckeye Grove.
Yeah, we had a little bit of an exclusive sneak peek there on the schedule. I know you were wondering if it was going to be the exact schedule, and it turned out to be, so that was a good deal for us. But yeah, I mean, with the season being just a month away, I mean, everything's scheduled to still happen. It's not like the season's called off or anything, but I mean, you can't have a season without having an actual schedule. So it just feels like a really big kind of roadblock kind of out of the way. And with the schedule dropping, it also coincided today with the news that the Big Ten has released its kind of conference-wide medical procedures as well, which in turn means that preseason camp can go on as scheduled, if not even a little bit earlier. And that was a big question from last week because of that document that we saw that the Big Ten said that camp would not go on as scheduled if there weren't these procedures put into place. So that was kind of the other shoe dropping today alongside the schedule. Those two kind of big roadblocks kind of gotten out of the way at this point with all the news today.
Yeah, so, without further delay, we'll kind of go into the schedule for those of you who are listening to us in the car or whatnot and haven't had a chance to really go over the schedule. We'll kind of go over them 2-3 games at a time. Ohio State will open the season on the road in Champaign-Urbana on a Thursday, September 3rd at Illinois, before coming home in the following week back in a traditional Saturday slot. They'll be hosting Rutgers. So, Illinois, an improved team last year, went to a bowl game. Rutgers, well, they have a new coach, but, and a lot of coronavirus cases right now. Kind of, not the most, difficult stretch to start the season in the first couple of games.
Right. And yeah, that's what, I mean, when me and you were kind of making our, what we thought the schedule might look like, what was that, last week or a week and a half ago, something like that. At that point, it seemed like there might be some really heavy hitters up front for Ohio State, and there are for other teams. There are, like a Minnesota, for example, has just got a really grueling September schedule. For Ohio State, not so much. Starting with Illinois, Rutgers, then after that you got Purdue and Indiana. But I mean, I think still like starting on the road for Ohio State is a bit of a question mark, because of the pandemic, the virus, kind of the uncertainty. I know Justin Fields yesterday was talking to the media saying that he was more concerned about what other programs are doing, and I know they have the baselines for procedures and whatnot now. But I mean, that could be something that throws you off a little bit, starting on the road when you thought you were going to be, starting at home, type of thing.
Then we get into week 3, and this is the one game that was added to Ohio State's schedule. Purdue, at Purdue, Ross-Ade Stadium, West Lafayette. Ohio State's 2-4 in its last 6 trips to Purdue, and I think it even goes further out to like 3-5. I mean, it's been a house of horrors for Ohio State. And we'll talk about this one individually. I mean, we know that Purdue, they've been nicknamed the spoiler makers for years, and they certainly have spoiled some Ohio State dreams along the way. You get them week 3, 2 of your first 3 are on the road, and this one really appears to be kind of that that anchor game of the first half of the schedule in terms of just what Ohio State's going to have to contend with.
Yeah, and everyone knows what happens. That last time out for Ohio State against Purdue. I mean, even looking at the Big Ten Network Twitter right now, one of the first responses here on the schedule is, careful, everyone knows what happened last time they, being Ohio State, came to Purdue. So that's an early one people are going to be looking at. But at the same time, I think both me and you were thinking that Ohio State might get Minnesota in terms of that additional West Division matchup on their schedule. And, I mean, if I'm Ohio State, I'd rather play Purdue than Minnesota, personally. Even given the history, with that recent huge upset loss and whatnot. And I'd still rather see Purdue than Minnesota, to be honest with you.
You see, and I'm on the other side, and this was even before Rashad Bateman, the talented wide receiver for Minnesota, opted out and is going to declare for the NFL and spend this year training instead of playing in this COVID, environment. I understand that, it was going to be a road game because Ohio State already had 5 home and 4 on the road, and the Big Ten wanted to balance it all out. So it was going to be versus going to West Lafayette or to Minneapolis. I just, I have seen enough Purdue games, especially games at Purdue through the years, to know that crazy things happen there. And, I think if you just sit there and you look at both games in a vacuum, the Minnesota game certainly would be a much more challenging game on paper, but these games, to use a tired sports cliche, games aren't played on paper. I think that Purdue game is just a little bit more scary. And of course, there's a lot of bravado on Buckeyes Twitter right now. We're going to thump them by 35, payback, blah, blah, blah. Well, obviously at 2-4 and 3-5 in terms of the last trips to West Lafayette, I'm certain they had payback on their mind in each of these games and just really weren't able to deliver.
Right.
We'll jump to the final game before Ohio State's first open week, and that's a home game against Indiana. The Hoosiers certainly have been getting better under head coach Tom Allen. I don't know a lot about them at this point. Certainly with the uncertainty of will there be a season? What will it look like? We didn't get to spend a lot of July really researching these teams. We didn't have spring football, but with that being a home game right there, that one looks like it should be pretty well in hand.
Yeah, I mean, and just looking at Indiana's schedule, that's a team that's got a rough go in the first half of the season. I mean, they start with Wisconsin, then Penn State, Illinois, but then you got Ohio State, Minnesota and Michigan, the 2 next ones out of that. That is a tough stretch for the Hoosiers right there. For Ohio State, I'm not seeing a lot of issues with that matchup, though, for the Buckeyes.
Ohio State then gets an open week on October 3rd. All of this is provided that we don't have any sliding on schedules. And, when we were watching the schedule release show, I mean, they talked so much about how there are so many open weeks that move in unison in terms of being able to juggle these games if need be. So, after we get through that first open week, a pair of games that just in terms of name brand, you would sit there and be like, oh my God. But, home against Nebraska, and then at Michigan State. Nebraska still hasn't found its mojo under Scott Frost. Adrian Martinez is returning. J.D. Spielman is transferred out of that program. I believe he ended up at TCU. We don't know if the Huskers have figured out how to play defense yet. And then that game up at East Lansing on the 17th of October, Mel Tucker has stepped in after the sudden retirement of Mark D'Antonio, a team that, really doesn't know its identity yet. I mean, you could say part of that under a first-year head coach. Part of it under is the fact that they don't have a Connor Cook, Drew Stanton at quarterback right now. Is it going to be Rocky Lombardi, who has seen spot duty against Ohio State? Is it going to be a young guy? Two games that should be pretty winnable, but, certainly marquee names in terms of just, maybe some historical cachet.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Ohio State, once again, that stretch is that really doesn't hurt me right there. I mean, we saw what happened last year against Nebraska. We saw what happened last year against Michigan State. I mean, Ohio State's had the jump on Michigan State for a number of years now. I like both of those games for Ohio State as well.
And then there's October 24th. The game. The Wolverines. That team up north, whatever you want to call them. We're not FCC regulated. We can say whatever we want, but we won't. Michigan comes to Columbus. And I'd been teasing for a couple weeks at Buckeye Grove that that this game certainly wasn't going to be at the end of the season. We weren't sure at first if they were going to front load divisional games or if they were going to put them in the middle, but we knew that there was going to be some sort of juggling, and this October 24th date really stuck with me, and I've got some other points I'll make about it here in a second. But Griffin, your thoughts on the game being in October for the first time since 1933?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense for it to be in October. They weren't going to have it be the last game, obviously, because of with all the potential for things sliding around. Like, you want to make sure that the game actually does happen. Still not super early in the season. I think October makes sense because you still need some build up, some anticipation. You can't just roll that game out, the first game of the season. That would just feel like kind of an injustice, in regards to the rivalry. What I'm surprised about is, I guess, I don't know, when I was kind of rating my own schedule, like I mentioned before for a thing we were doing a couple weeks ago, I put a bye week right before that game, or you could put a bye week after that game. I thought there would be a bye. I feel like it would make sense to have a bye around that game a little bit closer, rather than kind of being in the middle of that that 5-game stretch there in between bye weeks, just to kind of I don't know, alleviate some of the pressure on the back end of that rivalry, or have a bye week in front of it to kind of add to the anticipation that you would usually get from having it be the final game of the season. But instead, you're kind of getting in the middle of that that middle stretch there before the final bye week and before the final game of the season. But yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people that are spitting mad about it being in that spot. The game is right during the window of when the World Series should be, if that goes on, if Miami and Philadelphia and St. Louis and all these teams don't end up derailing Major League Baseball, but that's another time, another place. While I don't think that Fox and ESPN were sitting in the room as they were putting these schedules together, we all know that Fox gets the first pick. We all know that the game is going to be the game that Fox is going to take. And having it on the day that game two of the World Series should be, makes, a lot of sense. That is going to be just a monumental number for Fox. And I know people are like, well, why do I care about them? Well, because they write a very large check, and because of them, member schools are able to get $55 million a year. And while, Ohio State's budget is huge or whatever, I mean, certainly helps, all 14 teams in the conference. I I don't think that we're going to see this game at noon, to be honest. And everybody's like, oh, well, they put so much in this big noon kickoff and big noon Saturday and whatnot. That's great. Marketing and continuity and all that, fantastic. But when you have the World Series, something that you write a gigantic check for, and then you also have the game, something that you're writing a gigantic check for, you want to sit there and link them up as much as you can and not give people the opportunity to turn the TV off. So if you play Ohio State, Michigan at 12, and then you play, I don't know, USC, UCLA at 3:30, because they do have, Pac-12 TV rights as well. I mean, we're just using that as an aside, and if I'm offending anybody, I apologize. I'm from the West Coast, so I can say this, though. You sit there and you do something that probably has limited national appeal, and you have, an 8.5 national rating coming out of Ohio State, Michigan, and 80% of them turn it off because of, lack of interest in that game. That just doesn't make sense. So this game really feels like it could be a 3:30 game, which again won't pacify the group that want to see a nighttime Ohio State Michigan game, and said, well, if we have a season that's completely off the rails, let's just buck all trends and play it at night. Well, you're not going to play it at night. You're not going to put the World Series game on FS1. You're not going to put Ohio State Michigan on FS1. So if I had to gather, I would say this is going to be a 3:30 game. I mean, it could even be something just based on how their programming is. Maybe they put a 3 just so you have a 3.5 hour window to be able to play the game to get it to 6:30. It just really depends on what time the first pitch is. You just don't want to get into a game that goes multiple overtime, so you get 5 minutes of your pregame show. But a long-winded answer for the fact that I understand kind of why that date fell the way it did, and I think I have a beat on what's going to happen in terms of a TV time for that.
Yeah, and I think some people that might not remember back all that far kind of think that the Ohio State Michigan game has been played at noon kickoff since the beginning of time, but that's actually not the case. Even the game of the century back in 2006, that I believe that was a 3:30 kickoff as well, if I'm not mistaken. And there's been there's not a night game, but there's been different kickoff times, and so if people are trying to get their pitchforks out about the game not being played at noon, I think they're a little bit misled there.
Yeah, I remember. I think I remember like a 2:00 game in there at some point. But yeah, that 06 game certainly was 3:30 window, somewhere around there, because it was dark out when that game finished, and the stands poured onto the field.
Right. And no one's gonna care at the end of the day. Like, maybe if it was a night game, I could see that being just offensive to the the traditions of the game a little bit. To some people maybe, but at the end of the day, no one's really going to care about when exactly the kickoff time is. But you make a lot of good points that a lot of people probably aren't, people that aren't as tuned in to such things probably aren't thinking about all the TV contracts and all that stuff when it comes down to this scheduling and how it's unveiled here. So you make a lot of good points there.
And we'll finish up this this part of the schedule with there are a couple more games before the next open week. Ohio State goes to Maryland on Halloween, and then honestly, we talked for multiple minutes about the Michigan game, but truthfully, the Penn State game, November 7th, Happy Valley, that's probably going to be the game that's going to decide a lot. I mean, certainly the Big Ten East, the team that survives that one probably ends up winning the Big Ten championship game, is in position to go college football playoff if we have one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And this one is, I guess, the one that I would be most surprised at how late it's coming in the season. Are you surprised at all to see it fall all the way back to the second to last game of the year, just because, I think the conversations about the front loading the division rivals and whatnot, it does make sense. So I guess if anything, I would have thought maybe to have seen that and maybe the Nebraska slot in terms of just just in a vacuum, like when the game would be played for those reasons. Are you surprised to see it fall back as far as it did in terms of time in the season?
Just based on the parameters this year and the questions of things are going to happen or not, yeah, maybe a little bit. We certainly have seen Penn State even later in the year during, normal circumstances. But, I will say this, that November 14th, the week after, is an open week. November 28th is an open week. And then we haven't even gotten into what December could look like. So there certainly are a lot of opportunities for make good if they're not able to do it. But I will also say that if you've already gotten to this point, and I'm not naive enough to say that, well, if coronavirus hasn't struck by week 3, it's not going to strike. But I am going to say that, if you've gotten 8 games into the season at this point, we certainly are, I think we're kind of past a tipping point in terms of, all right, they either have this under control to a certain extent, they have the right, policies and protocols in place to keep everything moving, or there's just enough of a tolerance to how this is going to work out that we're there. But, you make a very valid point in terms of it being there. I mean, it's the last of the divisional games. I mean, heck, it's in November. I mean, we're all the way to the end, and, Ohio State doesn't play 2 of the 4 weeks in November and whatnot. But, it certainly was a difficult undertaking to be able to put this schedule together and try and have enough stuff moving in unison to have, some additional weeks there. And they really could have been painted in a corner. And, we didn't get any real strong insight onto that one, but, that's certainly a game that, the world will be watching.
Oh yeah, and let's not forget about the big news, coming out of Penn State today. Probably the best player on their team, Micah Parsons, All-American caliber linebacker. The reports are that he's going to opt out of the season, kind of coming off of the heels of the Rashad Bateman decision for Minnesota yesterday. Another huge Big Ten heavy hitter in Micah Parsons for Penn State, potentially opting out. On the Big Ten Network, they were talking about it as if it was less official than what I had seen previously, so I haven't seen all the details on that. But that could be huge factoring into the matchup with Ohio State as well. I think a lot of people felt that Micah Parsons was, one of the best players in the Big Ten, best defensive player probably.
Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't seen an official release yet, but Yahoo Sports came out yesterday reporting that he'd been a name that had been associated for several weeks as a potential opt-out. So, I think the wheels had been in motion, and, and now it appears that that's going to happen. And this is as of the time that we record the podcast, so you could be listening to this 2 days from now and be like, what are you talking about? This already happened. But, at the time that we're recording this podcast on Wednesday afternoon, early afternoon, it's not official yet, but we have no reason to believe that there's going to be a last second change. Right.
And for Ohio State fans, you might be thinking, like, with the loss of a big time player like that for Penn State, like that'll only make things easier for Ohio State or something like that. Barring potential opt outs among Buckeye players. But at the same time, it's like you really don't want to see like those. Just as a fan, as a fan of somebody watching the Big Ten in general, you don't want to see, these teams lose their best players if the season is going to actually go on. You would kind of rather see Ohio State play Penn State, at full strength, in my opinion. So it is kind of a shame. I mean, obviously for Micah Parsons, I can't argue with the decision there, or for any of these guys opting out. Really, I mean, I totally understand the decision, but at the same time, it is kind of sad to see. Just if you're wanting to see all the Big Ten powers up there, at the height of their powers and at full strength.
Yeah, you certainly want to be tested along the way before you potentially get to a playoff and have to face an Alabama or Clemson or whoever who is going to have players that are right there of Micah Parsons' caliber. But we'll get into the opting out thing a little bit more into that here in a minute. Ohio State, November 14th, open week, and then they end the season at home on the 21st, barring any changes with Iowa. a team that they haven't played since 55-24 happened in Iowa City. Ohio State, if all goes well, should have the Big Ten East crown in hand by that point. But, senior day, and there are going to be a lot of underclassmen that will probably be playing in their final home game as well, too. That shapes up to be a big game.
Yeah, and that's part of that revenge tour, so to speak, this year for Ohio State. You get Purdue back, and you get Iowa back potentially from the 2017-2018, big season-affecting, upset losses there. Well, Ohio State gets both of them back, and they get to end the season with a big game. Iowa, I want to say Iowa finished last year pretty high in the AP, definitely in the top 20, right, in the AP poll last year. I've seen some people, slotting them a little bit lower this year, and obviously all the stuff that's been going on with Kirk Ferentz and the culture and whatnot there has been kind of a headline this offseason as well. But that's still a huge game. It's not Michigan, but that's a big game to end the regular season on for sure for Ohio State, and not an opponent to look past.
We've gone 26 minutes already. We're going to take a quick break, and then a lot more thoughts here on schedule release day for the Big Ten. For Griffin and I'm Kevin. Let's take a quick break.
Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HagueH2O.com.
Welcome back. After fumbling into that break, which kind of just was thrown right in there, we're back on the BIA podcast. We've gone through the Ohio State schedule. We kind of talked about, where the open weeks are. The Big Ten championship game slated to happen December 5th. We haven't even really talked about fans, and I don't even know how much we can talk about that because we don't really know. If you don't have fans at games, you certainly can move things around a lot easier. If you have limited fans, you're certainly impacting fewer fans. But, there is the potential that Big Ten championship game could slide from the 5th to the 12th or the 19th, like some other conferences, if for whatever reason there, is the necessity to not play games on certain weeks and to be able to do make goods or things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think me and you are both just happy to see that they do have, plans for a Big Ten championship game, because I know, Gene Smith a few weeks ago was saying that they weren't even worried about a postseason in general, whether that be nationally or just a Big Ten championship game. So, I think it's encouraging to see that they are saying, okay, we're planning on having, an actual Big Ten championship game coming after that open week for everybody. That's definitely a positive sign for me, looking at the schedule.
I want to double back to something. We talked about opting out and Micah Parsons, and there have been a couple of other guys. Rashad Bateman, WVU had a guy earlier today who did it. The first one was a defensive back out of Virginia Tech. People sit there and they look at a guy like Justin Fields. 2 years out of high school, certainly had a tremendous year last year. A concern there, but we had an opportunity to talk to him on Tuesday, and after he delivered his wanting to beat the brakes off of Michigan line, certainly didn't sound like a guy who was thinking about foregoing this season and just working on training himself in the 21 draft.
Yeah, I thought he definitely could have given a much more vague answer to that question, and I don't think anyone would have, looked at him like, I don't think if he opts out, I don't think anyone's going to be looking at him like, man, you really, screwed the team or anything. Everyone will understand that decision, even as much as they don't want to see him go. But he gave a pretty in-depth kind of answer about why he wouldn't opt out, which he didn't have to do. You know what I mean? He said that his financial needs aren't as dire as other players that might be looking to opt out. He said basically his family is kind of solid with money. Basically, is what he was saying. He said he's always had whatever he's needed, and that for him, it's not a priority to get to the money as fast as he can. That's almost verbatim what he was saying yesterday. With a guy like Shaun Wade, that question came up as well as kind of the biggest name on offense and defense for Ohio State. I mean, while Shaun Wade did say that he hadn't been thinking about opting out. I mean, I thought that his response was kind of the vaguer response of the two, and what I would have expected to hear from Fields. So I thought it was probably a pleasant surprise for Ohio State fans to hear from Fields a response that really made it seem like he isn't thinking about opting out.
Another thing that I wanted to kind of throw out at you, something that you wrote about earlier today on Buckeye Grove during the show, the multi-hour show on BTN. They had a chance to talk to former Ohio State head coach Urban Meyer about the game not being on the final weekend of the season, and he certainly had some great insight as being a coach who coached in that series and as a head coach had an unblemished record.
Right, and that was kind of one of the bigger headlines out of our kind of media day with the captains yesterday, was that a lot of the players, Jonathan Cooper, Wyatt Davis, Justin Fields, they were saying, we don't care when the game is played against Michigan. We'll take them at whatever week. And which is what you should say as a player, because what are you going to say? Like, oh, we're not playing him in the last season. Like, what are you supposed to say? Like, they're gonna have to say they're going to take him whenever they're going to take him. But it was interesting to hear Urban Meyer had a kind of a different approach to that question. He referred to the game being moved from the last game of the regular season, up. He referred to it as heartbreaking, which is kind of interesting to hear. But I also think it makes sense coming from the perspective of a great Ohio State head coach that was here for close to a decade. That's got he's really steeped into the Ohio State tradition. He's very rooted in what that game really means. He's seen more of those games than any of the players on this team will have played in. So for him, it probably does feel different. For him, it's kind of sad to see. I know it's the same way for a lot of fans too, that have obviously just been, it's just the tradition of the game and it being the last week of the season has just been so instilled in them over the course of their life. But it was interesting to hear Urban Meyer's take on that. I wonder if his answer would have been a little different if he was still the head coach. Like, I'm curious to hear what Ryan Day's take on it is. If it's similar to Urban's, or if it's more similar to what the players were saying, like, we'll take him any week.
Yeah, and at least we'll have an opportunity to talk to Ryan Day if all things go according to plan tomorrow on Thursday. I had to think about that one for a second in some sort of conference call setup. I'm going to shift gears, staying on the schedule talk. BTN issued, they posted a list of, notable games, as they put it. And there's a good smattering of, many of the major teams there. And I'm going to go through a couple of them with Griffin and just get, two quick thoughts on each of them, or we could be here for another 30 minutes. The first one they got in week 2, Michigan at Minnesota. I mean, that's certainly Michigan breaking in a new quarterback, having to replace a lot against a Minnesota team that, seems to be kind of a sexy pick in the West, but losing arguably its best player. I mean, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, last year we saw Michigan struggled a little bit out of the gate, with that huge loss to Wisconsin in the first few weeks. Wasn't against Army. They had a little bit of a slip against Army as well, but they ended up pulling it out. But Minnesota as well, I think, some people might think that last year's success for them was a little bit of a fluke, possibly. That's kind of what they're going to have to prove this year, that it wasn't. Even though a lot of people think they have the second best quarterback in the Big Ten, and everyone loves PJ Fleck, obviously. Yeah, I'm very excited to see that game for sure. Man, in terms of who I would like in that game, I would probably take Michigan in the matchup. But that's definitely a big one early.
Yeah, I would probably take Michigan that one too. And then we're going to jump to week 3, and one team could really be, Penn State goes to Michigan. a huge game in the Big Ten East. One team is going to be sitting there definitely with a divisional loss at that point. Penn State, more than likely going to be still trying to figure out how to go on without Micah Parsons. We already kind of talked about Michigan at that point. I don't know which way I'm leaning in that one at this moment.
Yeah, I would probably go Penn State, honestly, just a gut kind of reaction to just kind of the tier that each team has been on. Penn State just kind of they've just been closer to the top, of the country in recent years. And but man, that is tough for Michigan to go back to back Minnesota, Penn State that early on in the season. Yeah, that's another huge one early in this new Big Ten schedule.
Looking ahead to week 4, we'll go to the West. Minnesota at Wisconsin. I'm going to take Wisconsin just because of the fact that you should just probably always take Wisconsin until proven otherwise. They kind of have been the class of the West, and you had a year where Northwestern came up and won the division and whatnot. Anybody who's like listened to me on maybe some of the other podcasts know I'm not the biggest Jack Cohn defender in the world. I think that he's pretty mediocre. But I just think that they are better at their system with what they have right now. And I think, Minnesota's still going to be trying to find itself. And, Minnesota certainly is not coming off for an easy week with Michigan in week 2, Iowa in week 3, and then Wisconsin in week 4.
Yeah, and with Wisconsin, obviously they've had no issue, replacing great running backs, over the last decade, with guys like Melvin Gordon and guys like that. But obviously they might be losing the best one of the bunch, arguably, in Jonathan Taylor. And unless I'm just missing something, I'm not sure if they have like a feature back guy that they're looking at as the next kind of huge Wisconsin running back. I could just be misinformed on this though. But I mean, I'm not gonna bet against Wisconsin ever to run the ball, but it'll be interesting to see how much production they can replace from Jonathan Taylor, a guy that was putting up 2,000-yard seasons every year in his tenure there.
Wisconsin always has a 30 carry back on their roster, probably 3 of them. So I mean, while we may not be able to identify them at this point, they certainly they're grooming somebody. But we'll see. Week 5, this one is just more notable because of what it is, and maybe not because of what the outcome's going to be. Michigan State goes to Michigan. I like Michigan big in that one. I think Michigan State is going to really struggle this year. If the game were in East Lansing, I'd still take Michigan, but maybe not by as much. But I think that Michigan, especially if Penn State gets one over on them in week 3. They're going to have their backs against the wall, and I think they're going to play their best football there.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing the same thing as you there. I know we had looked at a couple articles talking about that game potentially being like, the first game of the season or even earlier in the season than week 5. But I think that's a nice slot for that game to fall in. And I don't see Michigan State taking that one, to be honest with you.
I'm going to skip over the ones that involve Ohio State. We'll talk about those quickly at the end. Week 8 is where I'm at now, Ohio State, Michigan. But you also have an interesting one with Iowa going to Penn State. We haven't talked a lot about Iowa here. There's certainly a lot of non-football stuff that's going on right now in terms of, non-on-the-field stuff when it comes to Iowa. You just don't know, but the years that we're ready to sell on the Hawkeyes are the year that they all of a sudden string together under a 12-game schedule, a 10-2 type of season. So, I think that's one that even though that game is at Penn State instead of at Kinnick, where Iowa is always much more dangerous and good for that one highly ranked upset, I think that one's a challenge.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Talking about Urban Meyer's comments on the Big Ten, I don't know if this is what he was alluding to, but he was talking for a while about programs where we were hearing about distrust in the program and how much of a red flag that is. And I wonder if he was at all alluding to the culture situation at Iowa with Kirk Ferentz and everything like that, with all the issues going on there. Urban Meyer was just really preaching how much of an issue it is if you hear players and guys talking about distrust, because he was just talking about how important it is in an organization for there to be distrust all the way around. It'll be interesting to see if that has any real tangible impact on Iowa's season. It certainly could, but at the same time, we won't really know until it starts. Obviously, Iowa lost Tristan Wirfs last season, but they still have Alaric Jackson on the offensive line. That's a big return for them. But yeah, their season. I'm not really sure how to peg their season as of now, just with kind of the off-season questions surrounding the program.
Exactly. We'll speed up this into more of a lightning round here. Week 9. Some of the same suspects. Wisconsin goes to Michigan. Another one where, go back to the game last year, and Jonathan Taylor just ripped up Michigan in that game. Michigan put up a couple scores late in the game to make it a little less of a whooping, but that game was definitely a whooping as it went along.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I could see Michigan pulling that game out of the hat this year, potentially. We'll see a big clash there on another Halloween game there as well.
We'll skip the Ohio State-Penn State game here. Week 11, Wisconsin at Iowa. I really think that's a game that could, Wisconsin may already have the West locked up by then. Maybe Wisconsin isn't as good as we think they are going to be. Maybe it's Iowa. Maybe, who knows? But, that game really sits in a position of where it could be a huge game in terms of determining the Western divisional participant in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, especially so late in the season as well. The second to last slot, and Iowa's one of the teams that does not have that bye before that final week with Ohio State. Definitely some big West Division implications right there.
And then, we'll hit one of the traditional rivalry games in Week 12, Purdue at Indiana, Old Oak and Bucket. That's one that you just sit there and you look at face value and you're like, well, I like Purdue, but, it's going to be at Indiana. And this isn't that 4-8 type of Indiana team right now. At least that's not the trend that they've had here recently under Tom Allen. So I think that should be an entertaining game.
Yeah, no, I have been interested in the kind of the PFF, breakdowns of quarterback play and seeing how high Michael Penix for Indiana ranks among like national quarterbacks with his play last year. Obviously, he dealt with some injuries, but a lot of people are high on him going into this season. I'm definitely curious to see if he can put up some numbers this year, in general in the Big Ten.
And then we'll hit the 3 major Ohio State games. We won't necessarily do them in order because even though Ohio State draws Michigan in Week 8, that's the last game in our book. So we'll hit that one last. But Ohio State at Penn State Week 10, under best case scenario, they have 20% of a crowd. Under most likely scenario, they have no crowd. That's obviously, that's got to be 7-10 point swing right there just for that fact.
Yeah.
And let's be honest. We're not that far removed from a 1-point Ohio State win, a 1-point Ohio State win, and a 3-point Penn State win in that series. But Ohio State's done pretty well in State College through the years since Penn State has joined the Big Ten. So, let's not make it sound like it's an impossibility to win there. That the building is hexed. Ohio State certainly can claim that more when it comes to going to West Lafayette and taking on Purdue. There might be an upside down horseshoe there, but they haven't dealt with that in terms of going to Penn State.
Yeah, and if you just look at the matchup from last season too, it seems like they got a little bit of breathing room, off of that several year stretch there where it seemed like just a coin flip in terms of the outcomes of those games. It seemed like Ohio State kind of reached the next kind of plateau last season in that matchup. We'll see how much that can carry over this year. But obviously, like you said, they're not being able to be a huge whiteout crowd. That will definitely work in Ohio State's favor.
We'll jump to Week 12, Ohio State hosting Iowa. We had an opportunity to talk about that a little bit there. I just think that it's going to be a matter of, there could be the concern if Ohio State has the East wrapped up and everything else that maybe you let your foot off the gas a little bit. But we also know as conferences are all going to be a little bit different with how they're making up their schedules, it's going to be a dog and pony show if there's going to be a college football playoff. You need to sit there and be impressive every week. Plus two being a senior day, the strangest of all senior days with Michigan not being the opponent. The first time that they faced them since 55-24, I think that Ohio State's going to come out with one tremendous amount of focus.
Yeah, I would think so too. I mean, even last year, going into that Maryland matchup, coming off of the close 2018 game, it seemed like the team was just so fired up to even get that game back. Like looking at that as kind of a bounce back matchup, and they won that game in 2018. So with the Iowa game, with some of the holdovers from that year and whatnot, I definitely think that even though it's not Michigan, you're ramping up the gas, to face your arch rival in the last game of the season. So that's obviously a letdown there to some extent. But I wouldn't think that it would be too much of a letdown in intensity from Ohio State playing a team like Iowa that could very well be ranked at the end of the season.
And then we go back to Week 8, Michigan at Ohio State. I mean, obviously, the Buckeyes have owned this series as of late. They've hung 11 million points on them over the last couple of games. They seem to have Don Brown's defense figured out. This is going to be weird. It's going to be weird playing it in late October and everything else. But I think that the second that Ohio State sees, that team from up north coming in with their white jerseys and the maize and blue, helmets and everything, it's not going to, they're not going to be concerned about a date on the calendar or anything like that. And, people are going to be like, well, of course you're picking it this way. You got, a vested interest in terms of running a website. But, I like Ohio State huge in this one, especially with all of the beat the brakes off of them comments and everything else. There's some stories that there's been some verbal sparring between Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day in terms of, how practices have been going and what you're able to do when and whatnot. And I'm not going to really, continue that story any further, but if there was a need for any extra motivation to take on your biggest rival, I think Ohio State certainly has it this year, and I expect Ohio State to easily hang half 100 on them.
Yeah, well, you talk about how weird it's going to be. At least it's not like a September game where it's still like 90 degrees out or something like that. That would really be a strange sight to behold, especially with the lack of fans in the stadium and whatnot. So at least you're getting to the end of October. That's not that far away from your typical late November game. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the last year's matchup against Michigan, it was closer than the final score. There were stretches where the game was closer than the final score would indicate. I mean, Michigan was for periods of time was just marching down the field on that Ohio State defense that hadn't really given up a whole lot of points to that point in the season. It ended up looking like a smooth sailing win for Ohio State. But there were a couple periods of time where it felt close there, and that might have just been the overall intensity of the rivalry getting to me as well. But no, I definitely would take Ohio State in the matchup. But obviously anything can happen at the end of the day in that game, even though we've seen it go one way for a majority of time for the last however many years. What is it now? 8 years straight.
Yeah, Urban was 7-0, and Ryan is now 1-0, so 8 right there. I mean, because the year before that, before Urban was Luke Fickell, and that was a game that Ohio State had every opportunity to win at the end of the game, and just a pass that was about 1 yard thrown about a yard too deep kept Ohio State from pulling off that one and creating a very interesting situation of how do you get rid of Luke Fickell, after beating Michigan at that point. But it was still a team that ended up going 6-7 and losing to Florida in the Gator Bowl.
Right.
But how much have we missed talking about actual football to the point that we've gone 49 minutes already at this point? So any final thoughts? I think if we come back and think of anything else, we'll just do a separate podcast because we appreciate everybody who's stuck with us for almost 50 minutes at this point.
Yeah, my final thoughts would just be I'm just looking at the schedule just gets me excited, for to ramp up for a season, potentially a season actually happening. A lot of bad headlines, recently, like I mentioned at the beginning. But this feels like a big day for moving forward towards an actual season. Actually knowing who Ohio State's going to begin the season against, knowing when these matchups are going to take place. That just gets me excited for college football to take place.
I had my final thought, and then I realized I just don't want to throw water on everybody and be that guy, so I'll make two final thoughts. I'll throw water on everybody and then uplift everybody. I'm going to remind everybody of, the statement that Gene Smith put out today saying, and I'm paraphrasing largely here, that, that no decision has been made for certain on the participation in terms of fall athletics. Those decisions will come at a later date based on local and state and federal, guidelines and whatnot. So, we're not 100% out of the woods. And now for my rah-rah part, I think we're there, baby. I think we're going to have football. I really do. I mean, granted, it's been proven time and time again, you really shouldn't, push all your chips in on anything in terms of how things have been going here in 2020. But, the will is there, the way is there. We just got to get there. I just ask everybody to listen to their leaders at this point and let's be smart about this. And, here in a month, we could have football, and, while life won't necessarily be perfect for everybody, I know that I was watching the Professional Cornhole League on ESPN Ocho during the time where there was nothing going on. So, the thought about college football going on has me even 100 times more excited than having NHL hockey going on. And anybody who knows me knows I'm a gigantic hockey fan. So I've missed college football. I love college football. Please don't ever leave us again.
I would echo all those sentiments for sure.
But, as I said, if we come up with any other thoughts, we will drop another BIA podcast. That's the great thing about this. We can run them whenever we want. I promise we're going to get on a regular schedule here at some point, but we're not quite there yet. But I want to thank Griffin for spending 52 minutes with me on this podcast here on this busy Wednesday. And I want to thank you for listening to us and, of course, being a fan of Buckeye Grove. If you're not a member of Buckeye Grove, be sure to sign up. Month away from football, knock on wood. This is the time to get on board. If you have any questions, you can always private message me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon or email me at kevin@buckeyegrove.com. But for Griffin, I'm Kevin. Want to thank you for listening to the show, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.